Okay, so I will start with my intro. Wait a second. And just for security measures, I won't be displaying my face. That's fine. Oops.
Yeah, sounds good. Probably help too with the internet if you're not having your video on, so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what happened?
If you'd like, I can also share my screen. You can send the presentation my way, if that makes sense for you.
Okay, I think it's starting up. I don't know why this is not working.
It could be your internet. Maybe, yeah, if you want to share your presentation with me, then I can share from my computer.
Okay. Let me just pull it up. Oh yeah, did you guys get a chance to check in, or just like, no? I don't think you can do that on the webinar style.
If folks would like to, you can drop your name, maybe where you're coming from, and maybe like why you joined this presentation in the chat or even the Q&A while we figure out our tech. So I guess just to repeat, it'd be great to hear where folks are coming from and maybe, you know, what drew you to this particular workshop, if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat or the Q&A. And to use the chat, if you're in kind of like a full screen mode, you just go down to the bottom, it'll say chat and you can click on there and it'll pop up. I know some folks might be driving or on their phone, so no worries if that's not accessible for you.
Is there a way I can just call in and then you can just go through the slides and I can go through it on my phone? Would that work?
Let me see real quick.
Okay, I apologize. Like, I'm on the res and I won't be off here for like a week or so.
So I don't. Let's see. I think so. I've never done it with a webinar. But I'm gonna resend you the link, Micaiah, and then see if there's a phone number that you can call into.
Okay.
Well, I'll resend it to you right now. But for those of us who are just waiting, feel free to in the chat just mention maybe where you're coming from, and your name or how you'd like to be called, and what drew you to this particular workshop today. Cool, welcome. Good to hear that you're staying connected to the New Mexico and the Southwest through PowerShip. That's cool. I think I've seen you on some of the PowerShip calls, actually.
Okay, I sent the presentation.
Okay, sounds good. And it looks like you can dial in through your phone, so that might be easier for you. And then I can share it on my end.
Okay, cool. Let me just get off real quick and then call in with my phone.
Okay, sounds good. And I have the presentation here, so I'll start screen sharing.
Okay.
And it looks like we also have Kiani from Albuquerque who joined wanting to learn more about Gallup. We also have Penelope living in Kentucky, I believe, who engages with the Dene youth who lived in Shinley, and consider Canyon de Chelly my favorite place on earth and love the Southwest. Cool. It's cool to have so many kind of regions represented here.
I'm glad you guys are thank you for being so patient and waiting. Again, like if you've ever been on the res, you know that Wi-Fi is like super difficult to access, and even when you do, it's like pretty crappy. So thanks for that. Let me just fix this up and we'll get started.
Cool, sounds good, Micaiah. I am sharing the presentation now, so yeah, we're good to go once you call back in. And yeah, thank you everyone for being patient. I think something we have to think about when we organize during COVID, and also here in the Southwest, is that not everyone has access to things that we consider really basic facilities like internet. So definitely appreciate, Micaiah, you being willing to work through those things with us.
Okay, so I think it'll work from here, hopefully. If not, and then we can just go from there again. But yeah, let's get started. I'm super excited. I think there's several slides, and like I already wasted 20 minutes. Today we'll be talking about Bordertowns, specifically focusing on Gallup, New Mexico, which is occupied Dene Zuni territories. So go ahead, Erica. So let me just begin with my introduction. Yad a she ya Micaiah Charlie inishia. Adonet nishlinigi a kia ani nishlin. Being patkotni bashichin said not bifni a dashiche ado tkohagdini dashnele. Aquats ego a tine stun nishlin. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this workshop. Like I said, we'll be covering Bordertowns. My name is Micaiah Charlie, and I am of the Towering House clan, born for the Deer Springs people clan, and my maternal grandfather is of the Sleeping Rock people clan, and my paternal grandfather is of the Water Runs Together clan. And in that way, I identify as Dene. So like I said, Gallup is occupied Dene and Zuni territories. Although Gallup is surrounded by several other pueblos. So we'll just go over the table of contents. First, we'll be going over some definitions and some guiding questions to get you to think about the presentation, and hopefully you will take these guiding questions and maybe work on them or try to answer them or utilize them when you hold these discussions outside of the space. So definitions and clarification of frequently used terms, along with a list of encouraged questions to mind. The next one will be the violent saga of settler-colonizer tyranny. So the onset of settler colonialism and U.S. imperialism gave rise to the depths of Bordertown violence, so much that you cannot address one without addressing the other. And then we will go on to from historical violence to contemporary injustices, making our way to the fourth part of the presentation, which is which is like we are still here in Navajo, rough translation. And then the second to the last part will be Long Live Larry, a theory of revolution. And then finally, I'll just cover some resources if you would like to go over this presentation or do your own research outside of it. Okay, go ahead, Lyrica. And I really love this quote, so I did pull it from the Combahee River Collective statement. It just says, "We realize that the only people who care enough about us to work consistently for our liberation are us. Our politics evolve from healthy love for ourselves, our sisters, and our community, which allows us to continue our struggle and our work." I feel like it just sets a really good tone for the rest of the presentation. Go ahead, Lyrica. So the first part will be definitions and guiding questions. So we'll begin with definitions. Pretty sure you can read along, or I can read it for y'all. So border towns. A border town is a town or a city close to the boundary between two countries, and in this case, we will define a border town as small towns or cities surrounding the so-called boundaries of the Navajo reservation. When I speak about the Navajo Nation during this presentation, I am not referring to the Dene, the people. I'm using Navajo Nation as a political term, the Navajo Nation government, the political governing body of the Navajo Nation. And the next one is Ke. So in its very loose English translation, Ke is kinship solidarity. And it's an entire philosophy. I had written an essay on this, and I believe it's in the resources. So if you would like to read more about that, you can at the end. So basically, Ke is kinship solidarity, and with kinship solidarity comes duties and obligations. So just keep that in mind, and it relates us and it ties us to relatives beyond the nuclear European concept and ideology of family and relatives. So we go into talking about the land relatives, the four-legged, the wing, water, those are all relatives. And then next is unsheltered relatives. And this is a term coined by relative Hope Alvarado from the Red Nation, and it's used to describe the status of being on the streets. She coined it specifically to describe the act of displacement and dispossession from homelands because of settler colonialism and capitalism for Indigenous peoples who are experiencing homelessness. And if you've ever been in a border town, even on Facebook, if you see the memes, especially circulating about our unsheltered relatives battling alcoholism within the border towns and even on the so-called reservation, there's various terms that I don't like to use, just because they're derogatory and demeaning to they kind of devalue the life and the humanity in our unsheltered relatives, such as like Glani, that comes from the Navajo word aglane, which means loosely translates to drunk. So I don't like to use those terms. So for this, we'll be using unsheltered relatives. Go ahead, Lyrica. Here's a map I added in case you're not familiar with the Navajo reservation. So the yellow here is the current boundaries of the Navajo reservation, the political boundaries. So where the green stars are, those are, or actually I think the stars kind of came off of place, but I'll just point them out. So these are some of the notorious border towns of the so-called Navajo reservation. So we have Farmington, Shiprock, Aztec, and then we have Gallup, Grant, Milan, and Albuquerque in New Mexico. And then in Arizona, we have Page, we have Sanders, Winslow, and Flagstaff, Holbrook are some of the most prominent known ones, notorious border towns. I will fix this once I get good service. Okay, go ahead, Lyrica. Okay, so these are some guiding questions that you can keep in mind throughout the presentation, even afterwards. So who wields the power in border towns? How can we utilize the importance of relationships in political education? Again, I'm talking about ke. How can you practice radical ke in your community? I added radical before ke because some people who aren't familiar with the term will think it's just merely calling a person brother or sister or aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, when in reality, like I mentioned, it demands more of a person when you practice ke or kinship solidarity. So that in itself is a form of radical and revolutionary love. So how can you practice that in your community? And what lies beyond the oppression, and how do we get there? Some key words, ke, U.S. imperialism, kepe nahidzi, which means through kinship we are strong, and then relationships, capitalism, and displacement. Go ahead. Okay, so we're going to get into the second part, and we're going to start with the violent saga of settler colonizer tyranny. Again, this is just like a repeat. The onset of settler colonialism and U.S. imperialism gave rise to the depths of border town violence, so much so that you cannot address one without addressing the other. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Okay, so like I said, in order to truly and justly address border towns and their violent realities, we have to go back past the beginning. So we're going to start, for the presentation, we're going to start here in pre-Huelte, which is the Navajo word for long walk. It translates to like despair and just overall like oppression. And so this was in the late 1800s. So so-called Gallup was and is continually still home to Diné families who lived, herded, and farmed the area. And before we had the Diné were rounded up and, you know, heading to Fort Sumner, which is Huelte, the long walk, that was the final destination. Before we had arrived there, the Navajos were actually different. They were made up of several different bands. So kind of just, for example, just think of the Mescalero Apaches, the San Carlos Apache, White Mountain. That's kind of how we can understand how the Diné people were prior to 1868, which is the Long Walk, Fort Sumner, Huelte. When we had been captured, rounded up, and marched to Fort Sumner, and then our release, and then again in the 1960s, that's when we got thrown into this sort of like melting pot and under this broad political term of the Navajo Nation, just throwing us, the different bands of Navajos, under the term Navajos. And so we have several bands of Navajos who call Gallup and the surrounding lands of so-called Gallup home. We know from oral history and oral stories, well, in my family, that the lands east of Gallup, on your way to Albuquerque from Gallup, and that area in Ayambatko, well, that's how you pronounce it in English, Ayanabatko, that actually translates to Buffalo Springs. And it was named that because there were plenty of buffalo in the area prior to railroads, and then 1868 when they were hunted for game and they were cleared out for cattle. So we know that. And then following the rounding up of the Diné, especially near Canyon de Chelly, in Arizona, we know that Kit Carson, he came in and the United States military implemented a scorched earth campaign, and this was in 1868. Before we began our official walk to Fort Sumner, and this is where in which Kit Carson and other soldiers came in and they burned the crops of the Diné peoples. They cut down peach trees, and they slaughtered the animals. They burned hogans, kind of as like a last resort, so the Diné people would have nothing to come back to. And they were rounded up, and some of them were forced to surrender because of this. However, my family here in Bread Springs, New Mexico, also known as Bahale, we are a couple, I would say like 10 miles south of Fort Wingate, which was the first stop of the long walk. And we actually evaded capture because our leader here, our Natani, here in the surrounding area, heard of the soldiers coming to round up the Diné, and he took us to the mountains where we evaded capture. So not all Diné peoples went on the long walk. So we understand now, Gallup is occupied Diné territory, Diné and Zuni territory. And then, so that's all pre and during 1868, which is the long walk. And then post Fort Sumner, we have the release from the first reservation or concentration camp, Fort Sumner, in 1868. And this is where we can really truly understand the history, the violent history that feeds into the violent reality of Gallup, New Mexico. And that is the establishment of the first trading posts at Fort Wingate and Fort Defiance. Fort Wingate is, I would say, like 15 minutes east of Gallup, and Fort Defiance is in Arizona. I'm like trying to think of the directions. It's 30 minutes from Gallup, so not too far off. And a lot of families, because of the Scorch Earth campaign, when we were finally released from Fort Sumner, they had nothing to come back to. They had no food, no house, nothing to build a living off of. So these trading posts are no coincidence. The first settlers who came in and established these posts knew that they could profit off of the Diné, and our desire for continuation and survival, they knew that they could profit off of it. So they stocked their shelves with food and commodities that the captured Diné were used to in Fort Sumner, which is like flour, coffee beans, lard. they stocked the shelves with those already made commodities, spam, canned meat. So that's where we witnessed the first dependency on settler colonizers and especially trading posts for a living. And then, right here we go into catalysts for toxic dependent cycles between Diné peoples and settler colonizers. And you still see this today. And our determination to continue became profitable. And here we go into railroads and Fred Harvey. Let me pull up my notes for the railroads coming in around, making their way around 1881. We have our railroads coming in around 1881, making their way through Dinetka, Navajo lands. And like I said, they flushed out the buffalo, and this is where we see the first startup of dispossession of Diné and Zuni lands. So we have the Fred Harvey, who was a white entrepreneur, aka like land stealing settler in 1876, who owned and operated basic food catering / entertainment business and railroads. They opened up these things called Harvey houses. Even that name is just like, open up these Harvey houses. They were basically opened up alongside the the railroads, which, you know, they were opened up alongside the railroads because they knew that those railroads were profitable. And so as we see the railroads coming in and pushing further into Dinetka, we see that it's just to serve white wealthy Americans as they ventured into this fantasy of the wild, wild west. Well, in 1901, we have Fred Harvey. He died, so his company went to his sons, and they were making big profit off of his company, you know, going along, serving these people on the railroads, entertaining them. And then in 1918, we have the introduction of the automobile. We have the introduction of the automobile, and all these Harvey people, you know, the people who own this company, this entertainment company, were like, oh shit, like the automobiles came in, like, what are we gonna do? Like, we got to make that profit. And so they hopped on the train to exploitationville, tourism of the Southwest. So they were making big money by serving like food to these American colonizers, and then introduction of the automobiles. And so this wasn't enough. Displacing indigenous people specifically, we have wherever the railroad pushed through, the people were removed for that, all in the name of tourism and pleasure, and not for anything else, and well, including capital. So we have that, and then the Fred Harvey company realized that they could make a profit off of the Diné people, pushing this aesthetic of exotic Indians, selling tickets to go see Indian settlements and seeing the Indian lifestyle. So that's where we come into the Fred Harvey area of the 1930s. And basically, just a quick overview, the Fred Harvey era was the commodification and mass production of indigenous art, specifically Diné and Zuni artwork and culture. In the 30s, more settlers were adventuring onto Indian land by staying at Harvey hotels and taking exotic Indian tours. They needed some sort of like token or a souvenir to take home to show they had seen some real Indians. So they came across Navajo jewelry, and if you know any history about Navajo jewelry, you know that it's not the same as it is today. Well, some of them. Navajo jewelry was made of silver, and it was big, and it was bulky, and it was loud. And the people who were venturing into Dinetka via Harvey hotels and this whole tourism business and railroads, they realized that these Diné jewelry were too big, they were too loud, they were too heavy. So wanting to take home souvenirs, they started going to these trading posts and demanding smaller, lightweight jewelry. So the Diné people were displaced, and they began to rely on trading posts for income, and they had to give up. They had to conform to this idea, this desire for lightweight jewelry, which wasn't their traditional jewelry. So they had to give up a part of themselves to please the white settlers in order to get paid by the trading posts. And so we've seen this happen, and in the 30s, there was just like mass production of Navajo-made jewelry. And at this point in time, the Diné were forcibly removed from their lands, looped into a violent, dependent relationship with trading posts, and looking for a means to survive. And this is like selling their jewelry to the trading posts, who then sold it to the tourists. So we have the Diné catering to the needs of white exploitive settler colonizers by partially sacrificing their style of jewelry making, which was quality, heavy-duty silver pieces, in order to survive on their own lands. They realized means of survival in these times was correlated to the desires of the white men. They knew they liked the fake Indian shit, so they halted their culture to mass produce a cheaper version of the original jewelry. And you go into any trading posts here in Gallup, and there's dozens to choose from. And you go in, and you can see the style and the evolution of Diné jewelry. And I come from a family of silversmiths, and my dad, his work is very different. He builds 3D models of airplanes out of silver, and he lines it with turquoise. While my brother, he is going back and kind of revitalizing that early Diné jewelry making styles, techniques, the heavy duty and the loud statement pieces. That's what he specializes in. And so we see that now, Diné people coming to reclaim what was taken for them because they wanted to survive. And so we have the 30s, right after Fred Harvey era, the forced removal in the name of tourism. And then here we come into the birth of the aesthetic of exotic friendly Indian and savior traders. You come into Gallup, you see this aesthetic pushed everywhere. You see it in murals, you hear on the radio, Navajo radio, KJK, KTNN, you hear it pushed. And so we come into like the commodification of Diné culture and art. So as you can see, and if you see like a pattern, like all the problems and injustices that are currently the realities in Bordertowns, they have a history. They go back to the very beginning. So next we'll move into right here under 1930s, Navajo livestock reduction. So with the pushing out of the buffalo by means of the railroad, and for that purpose only. We have cattle coming in. And the Diné people, they were sheep herders. They had animals. They were constantly moving, following their livestock. So when the U.S. came in and realized, and around here there's oral stories where I live, that the elderlies had anywhere from 200 to 500 sheep, and that was like the minimum. So you can imagine when the U.S. came in and had seen this, and if they see wealth that doesn't add to their very own, they're gonna take it. It's threatening to them, and it's just a product and a form to push U.S. imperialism, and it's what we're gonna see here with the Navajo livestock reduction, wherein which the U.S. came in. John Coyler, who was, I believe, the BIA agent at the time, came in, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He came in, he assessed that the Navajo livestock were grazing too much land. So they came in and they completely slaughtered the livestock of the Diné people, which was like right after like a couple, 30 years or so after we came back from the long walk, and with the scorched earth campaign. And then again, we have to deal with this like destruction of our lifestyle for U.S. imperialism and for conquest, all in the name of, capitalism and capital profit. We see that right here with the Navajo livestock reduction. And this further pushed that dependency on trading posts in order to survive, further pushing us to kind of like conform to this idea, this aesthetic that, that they're trying to push here in Gallup, of this like friendly Indian trader kind of, this, how would we say, this fantasy that they would like to see here in the Bordertowns. And so we have the livestock reduction, killing thousands and thousands upon thousands of Diné livestock, sheep, cattle, horses. We see that. And we have the onset of exploitive and violent Diné trader relationships. And then in 1981 to the 60s, we have the opening of underground coal mines around Gallup. If you've ever been into Gallup and you pass through Gamerco, you can still see the coal mines standing. And we know from oral history that the coal mines around Gallup, at this time, there was already different colonizers coming into the area. We had the Italians, we had the French, we had the Spaniards coming in and occupying Diné territory, Diné and Zuni territory here in Gallup, finding work through the coal mines. And so they would set up these camps around the coal mines, and that's where they would reside for the duration of their job. But the Diné, they were hated and discriminated against by all the different people in those camps. So they would travel on horseback back home, which was like, 10 or so plus miles out of Gallup every day. And the Diné underground coal miner workers would receive and be paid as little as 25 cents a day for the same amount of labor as the other workers. And above ground Diné workers were paid as little as $1 a day. And you can see that exploitation and taking advantage of the people, the Diné people, for their work to this day. And I've seen it firsthand when I would go in with my dad into these trading posts, and he would sell his work, and they would undercut like all of that labor, and it was so infuriating. And it's just like, well, it goes back all the way to the coal mining days. And we move into the 70s here. So Gallup transitioned from coal mining to strip mining, and they have these mines on the outskirts of Gallup, not too far, like Sundance, Carbon Coal, Mentmore, McKinley Mine. And so again, that this thing was just this, underpaying the Diné workers, and we have that going into the 70s right here. And then we move into mysterious deaths of Navajo men and women in ditches near and around liquor establishments. And so we can see that there was an excess of liquor licenses here in Gallup. New Mexico liquor laws have a quota stating that it's only one liquor establishment per 2,000 people. Gallup has a population of roughly 21,000 at the moment, so that's about like 10 liquor establishments that are allowed in Gallup, and right now there's 37. So you can see that, and this has gone back way into the 70s. Gallup has always surpassed the quota for allowed liquor licenses and establishments under the New Mexico liquor laws. So we can see that. And Larry Cassous, we go into 1973, we have Larry Cassous, who is this like badass Diné freedom fighter. He was 19 years old, president of Kiva Club at the University of New Mexico, pursuing a political science degree. And at the time in 1973, the current mayor of Gallup was Emmett Garcia. And he was pushing for a campaign, Emmett Garcia was pushing for a campaign to address the alcohol issue in Gallup by bringing in a potential rehabilitation center. But he had his foot on both sides of the issue. He was also he owned like a big part of Navajo Inn, which is just this like infamous liquor establishment back in the 70s. So he was actively selling liquor to the Diné people while trying to push for a rehabilitation center. And this was not sitting right with Larry Cassous. So him and another individual, Robert Nakhaidene, went into Gallup and burst through the doors of Mayor Garcia's office, and some sources say it was a town hall meeting, but the story goes Larry Cassous kidnapped Mayor Garcia at gunpoint and dragged him out into the streets of Gallup, and he told him, "I'm going to drag you around the state, and I'm going to let you see what you're doing to our people. You know, you're saying that you're gonna help our people, but then you're actively selling the poison that is killing them." And so they ended up at this sports page center where Mayor Garcia was held hostage, and there was something happened, and Robert Nakhaidene was watching Mayor Garcia. Mayor Garcia got away, and by that time we have the New Mexico State Police waiting outside the sports center. They opened fire, and Larry Cassous lost his life, and Robert Nakhaidene came out with his hands up surrendering. New Mexico State Police went in and dragged Larry Cassous's body out into the streets of Gallup, and they took a picture with him like a trophy, and it was hanging up in one of the bars in Gallup. I want to say American Bar, and it was only taken down recently by a member and it was found out that it was still hanging up in a bar in Gallup by a member from Get Info Shop. So we know that. And so this resistance to alcoholism and to liquor licenses in Gallup goes back. And we see our Diné youth taking this up in the 70s, Larry Cassous. And a couple of weeks, the day of Larry Cassous's funeral, we had mass amounts of Diné high school students, Diné youth, walk out of their classrooms. We have them in Crown Point, Gallup, through Fort Defiance. They walked out the day of Larry Cassous's funeral to honor him and to bring attention to the alcoholism issue in Gallup. brought upon us by the liquor establishments. And then again in the 70s, we have what is known as engine rolling, which is just like the brutal beating and murder of our unsheltered relatives, our Diné relatives, indigenous peoples, specifically to the Southwest Four Corners region here. And police brutality. We have the Choke Canyon murderers in Farmington, when a group of white teenagers murdered three. I want to say three, but I think it's two. They beat three Diné relatives, and then that just prompted this whole movement of Navajo resistance, and we've seen the formation of the Coalition for Navajo Liberation, which we'll talk about later. Go ahead, Lyrica.
Oh, sorry, my computer's stalling. Micaiah, I just wanted to give you a really quick time check. I think you have about 20 or 15 minutes left, about 20 minutes left.
Okay, yeah, I know I have like tons of slides.
No worries.
Let's just okay, we're just gonna skim through it.
Okay.
So the next one is analyzing our history allows us to understand our current realities, ultimately equipping us with sound judgment and knowledge to organize for a safe future beyond capitalism, patriarchy, land dispossession, and the violent targeting of indigenous peoples. And so these are contemporary injustices. In 1988, we had Drunktown, USA, which Gallup was named that, in which more than 34,000 people were picked up for public intoxication and detained for up to 12 hours in what is known as a drunk tank here in Gallup, which is basically the rehab sort of center where you can stay for overnight and be released when you are sober. So at the time, more than 90% of those picked up were Native Americans or Navajos who lived on the Navajo Nation. And then in 2014, we have the Change in My Heart, Not in My Pocket campaign, which feeds into and pushes this narrative of radical individualism, in which we think and we believe that our communities are made up of individuals, and this also is reinforced by the ideology of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. This campaign directed Gallup residents and tourists and even incoming Navajo shoppers to refuse to give change to our unsheltered relatives, Navajo panhandlers, who that's pretty much the only way that they will eat, and it's through panhandling. And so there was this whole campaign to criminalize the current state of our unsheltered relatives, further criminalizing them and their desire to live in a town where, in a place where they were made to be invaders on their own land. And so we have incoming, and then the same year we have the biking mecca, in which an individual who's just like this big mountain biking maniac, and he was like, oh, let's go turn Gallup into this like biking capital, kind of like Moab, Utah, like let's go do that. And in his campaign, his proposal to the city, he said we need to address the shitty aesthetics in Gallup, meaning, our unsheltered relatives living on the streets. And then Junker Bridge is a well-known bridge in Gallup where unsheltered relatives live. At the time when this Chuck was trying to pass this biking proposal, Gallup stumbled across Junker Bridge and our unsheltered relatives living under there roasting cats for food. And so he made this this joke of Junker Bridge being an Airbnb that needs to be shut down. So we see that again, like it's just being pushed. Our Diné relatives who were displaced because of settler colonialism, because of this ideology and this fantasy of settlers wanting to come in and see this this trading posts and all these Indians. We were severely affected, and then we were criminalized and made invaders on our own land. And then we have the excess liquor licenses here in Gallup. Like I said, there's only supposed to be 10, allowed 10, but now there's currently 37 liquor licenses operating here in Gallup, excluding beer and wine sales establishments and licenses. And then in Gallup, Mayor 2020 election, we have the two most prominent socially and economically elite running for the mayor. We have Mayor Bonaguidi and Sammy Kyoto. Sammy Kyoto, along with his wife, own a majority of the liquor licenses in Gallup. And then we have Mayor Bonaguidi, who owns City Electric, who makes capital and revenue off of Diné culture, clothing, moccasins, dresses. And if you go on his Gallup review, you see that even this fantasy of Cowboys Indians is being pushed in his store. Although he has Diné workers, that is no reason to kind of not critique and to criticize and to call out that he is profiting from the history of the violence in Dinetka. And then in 2020, we have the Riot Act when former Mayor Jackie McKinney came in and he pulled one last shitty move, calling on Governor Michelle Grisham to come in and to enact the Riot Act, which would essentially close off all borders to Gallup at the first of the month. It was only supposed to be for 2 days, but they did it for a whole week, which cut off access to the Diné peoples. And at this time, the Navajo Nation was having lockdowns, 57-hour lockdowns, in which nobody could leave the Navajo reservation, leaving many families without food and water, fighting and combating COVID-19. So although we say, do not give money to these border towns, but yet there's no denying the fact that we're currently relying on them for basic necessities. Food for ourselves and for our livestock. We go to hay, TNR for hay. We go to TNR for propane, Harbor Freight for basic stuff, improvements for the house, Walmart for food, and then trading posts to pay bills, ponds for the elderly. So we see that, and the Riot Act was enacted. And a lot of people, there was different discourse about that. So you can do further research on that. I know I'm going over time here, and we have I don't know how many slides left. Yeah, there's so many slides. Lyra, can you go back one slide, please? And yeah, we just see the false Indian, trader aesthetic, radical individualism, and murder in the name of property and stolen wealth via the New Mexico Civil Guard. This is one that I really want to talk about, and the New Mexico Civil Guard is just this fascist, racist, white supremacy group operating here in New Mexico. Most of their members are from out of state, and they are coming in and terrorizing indigenous peoples, movements and protests for Black Lives Matter. We've seen that here in Gallup when a student here in Gallup organized a Black Lives Matter march. A lot of businesses here in Gallup called upon the New Mexico Civil Guard, which is just a bunch of, racist, vigilantes coming in, armed, heavily armed. And they came into Gallup, and I was actually part of that march. I was walking downtown, and there was an individual standing with a handgun on his side, and then he had a big ass gun across his chest trying to hand out water to these young people. And later in the slide, you will see, pictures and a list of all the businesses who brought in this danger and this violence into Gallup. Go ahead, Lyrica. And here's just like a list. If you go all the way down to McKinley County and you go to Gallup, right here on your left-hand side, you will see that they are allowed 11 liquor licenses, and they have 33 operating as of, I believe this is 2018, I want to say, or I'm not sure what it says. And so they are over quota by 22 liquor establishments and licenses. Go ahead, Lyrica. So here you can see Gallup pushing their trader-friendly Indian aesthetic with Perry Knoll, all these murals in front of his shop, and then we have the symbol of TNR. We have Alice Tanner. Go ahead, Lyrica. And here we have, on your left-hand side, we have a list of all the businesses who brought in New Mexico Civil Guard via Info Shop is Facebook page. We have Nick Estes here, who is part of a co-founder of the Red Nation. He tweeted about it, so you can read that. Here are just some pictures of the New Mexico Civil Guard in Gallup during the Black Lives Matter protest, in which they were ready to murder in the name of property and stolen wealth. Go ahead, Lyrica. Part 4, just like we're still here, go ahead. 7 generations of resistance. I'm pretty sure that this slide is like really quick from here now. Go ahead. So we have rage and resistance, and the point of this presentation is to get you to tap in to that, to that anger, and I'm trying to convey that it is okay to feel that, and to direct it towards resistance and to the revolution. Utilize that rage, that anger, push it toward the revolution. And we have the Coalition of Navajo Liberation, who was established and in the 1970s in response to the brutal murderings of our unsheltered relatives in Bordertowns, mainly by white colonizers, white settlers. And then we have the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, who is actively doing work in Bordertowns to address the various exploitive businesses. They recently shut down Tate's Auto here in Gallup, which was opening car loans for the elders and putting them in debt. And so you can go onto their website if you have a complaint about an experience with a hate crime or racism within a border town. You can go onto their website and you can fill out a file, and they will get back with you, and you can get some form of justice from that. And then what I want you to also take away from this is, recognizing the worth of the Diné peoples. I know I talked a lot about, being a colonized people, and our work having to be sacrificed, our culture, in part having to be sacrificed in order to survive. But even within that, these teachings and our inherent worth is not lost. It's just not being utilized. So once we tap into that through Ke, which I believe is like this beautiful foundation of any revolution, realizing that, we are not fighting against this, this violence, but we are fighting against violence not because we hate the oppressor so much, but because we love our people, and the very thing that we are working to protect, and for the next generations to come. So Kepe Nahitsi means, through kinship we are strong, and we need to realize that, to build to organize, to out-organize our oppressors. Go ahead, Lyrica. And here are just some Navajo sayings. We have "Long live the revolution," and the way you pronounce it in Navajo, it's very intricate and it's deep and it's difficult to explain, but a loose translation is "Long live the revolution." And it's pronounced like Hodlango, meaning forever, like forever. I know there's a word for it, but I can't think of it at the moment. Eons. So for eons, we will fight. The fight will forever be there. So Hodlango be dasidzido. Like we will constantly be standing in this fight for life or for whatever we desire, like we will be standing as a people, a strong people. And this desire to live, this desire to fight and to stand will never die out. So that's what it means. Loose translation, long live the revolution. And then we have another loose translation, which is like resistance and the continuation of our people, the desire to continue, or, you know, resistance and resilience, if you want to say that. And it's basically translated, pronounced like "bchit." So like moving forward to something. "Bchit" indeed. Oh, I'm sorry. I have like a hard time pronouncing this. Indezilko, meaning like we are strong people. Like we resist whatever is brought upon our people, whatever comes our way, you know, we are able to overcome it. It's active resistance. And then the last word, it's a phrase, but I'd rather break it down by words. Da di, meaning like we will continue to resist. And so the next one is we will never weaken. Do date ni klolta. And it's kind of described as not letting loose. So just imagine this, a tight rope, and not letting it have any loose, you know, any slack. So when we translate that in the context of revolution and liberation, it's translated as we will never weaken, or we will never slow down. The fight is in us, and it's so beautiful. When you understand it in the Dene language, it's so much deeper and there's so much meaning within it. But these are their loose English translations. Go ahead, Lyrica. So the last part is knowing the depths of Dene injustices is not enough to liberate us, but necessary to invoke and foster radical and revolutionary love for all relatives, giving spirit to the revolution where the goal is complete and collective liberation. Go ahead. And so with that, you know, with what we can do, this is where you want to pull up your those questions, like how can we utilize and that meaning to kind of address that last part, slide, the fifth part of the presentation, Long Live Larry, Theory of Revolution. You know, with that, we, in the spirit of Larry Casus and, you know, his sacrifice to see his people liberated from this oppression, you know, in his spirit, like how can we carry on that fire? How can we ensure that this momentum that was created and that was, you know, birthed back in the 70s, how can we ensure that it continues, that it survives, and through this, you know, just utilizing kinship solidarity, realizing that our communities are made up of relationships that have roots already established, but they're, you know, they're covered. They just need to be uncovered, and they need to be you know, taken care of. And when I was talking about radical individualism, and we've seen that brought into our culture, into Dene culture, especially into border towns, when we see our unsheltered relatives on the streets, you know, asking for money to eat, to get something to drink, especially during this heat wave. And we have our own people, Dene peoples, you know, blowing them off. Oh, they can get a job, you know, they can go home, they don't need to be here, like they're always asking for money. No, that's not how we were. That is not who we are as a Dene people. You know, we are a collective, you know, of relationships, and we have to realize that we have to, you know, turn this like fighting against one another and to link arms and to put this rage and this anger, realizing that the current state of our unsheltered relatives are not is not a reflection of individual merit, but of structures long established, before structures and patterns long established before we were even here, with the onset of settler colonialism and capitalism, patriarchy. And then we have U.S. imperialism coming in, further instilling this notion of radical individualism, where we believe that our, communities are made up of individuals rather than relationships. So that is one way that we can, reignite, or, further kindle this fire of a desire to see liberation of our people's collective liberation. And just, recognizing and building power, and getting people, which I hope that in some way I brought to you, power and knowledge, power through knowledge of, that you will go out and that you will feel confident in order to have these discussions, knowing that your realities are valid, your experiences within Bordertowns are valid, and just going out and going out and, asserting this, even if you have family members who are like going into pawn shops, like, just, let them know, like, Gallup would not exist without the Diné and Zuni peoples. Like, their very capital is built on our backs, so they would not exist, and they're dependent on the people, and then we have utilizing our resources, Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, join a collective, get involved, join the Red Nation Info Shop. We have, Uplift, who do amazing work for the people. And so here, we're just going to end with some resources. They're all listed right here. I'm going to see. I don't think my essay is put on here, but I'll attach it. And if you would like, I can possibly send it to you. And so that's my presentation in Chicago. I hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions, I don't think we have time for Q&A, but if you do, I believe we can answer some questions.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so. Sorry. I was just gonna say thank you so much, Micaiah. This is amazing. I wish you had like 2 hours for you to just like bestow us with all this knowledge, and I really appreciate how I think so much of this knowledge is really brought from your own lived experience of like having family and being from Gallup. I think that's so valuable, and I think especially in academia, like we don't give enough credit or even really value lived experiences. Definitely. So unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A because we got to get our next workshop going. But if you'd like, Micaiah, if you want to send along your paper, and I can send it out in I can send it to the folks who've attended. Okay. Yeah, definitely. That'd be great. Cool. All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and end this session so we can start our memes and organizing workshop. But thank you all so much. This was absolutely just amazing. And yeah, maybe keep an eye out for Micaiah's future work. I think she's got a lot to say. Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you all. Have a good one. Bye. Okay, thank you.